Master horse racing with daily racing forms Formulator, now free for DRF Bets members. Sign up to get the best bonus in racing with a $250 deposit match, plus a $10 free bet and free Formulator past performances. Go to drf.com/bet to play like a pro today.
Hi everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski here taking a look at the final leg of the Triple Crown, the Belmont Stakes on Saturday at Belmont Park. 3-year-olds going the 1.5-mile distance, one lap around this Belmont Park oval. And Craig, obviously there's no Triple Crown on the line this year, but we still have a pretty interesting 9-horse field signed on. It's a competitive affair. Many horses have a lot to prove in this race, or they're out to prove something. And in particular, the morning line favorite in this race, the number 6 Forte, who of course was the scratched early favorite for the Kentucky Derby, coming back off a layoff. He's got questions to answer, as does the other Todd Pledger trainee, who I have as the second choice on the morning line, Tapit Trice. Many contenders in this Belmont Stakes.
Yeah, it looks a little different than the Preakness on paper, even though the Preakness wound up being a pretty interesting race. This one looks more competitive, lots of different directions you can go. And I totally get that you made the two Todd Pledger horses the favorites, given his success in the race. But I do think there are plenty others to talk about.
Yeah, there's something to say about every horse in this race. Maybe the number 5, Il Miracolo, is a little tough to make, but we'll go through all of the contenders after we discuss the pace situation in this Belmont. And to do that, let's take a look at the TimeformUS pace projector. And Craig, this is one where I saw some people on social media a little confused by the fast pace flag showing up in this race, but there is some speed signed on in here outside of the expected early leader, the number 4 National Treasure. Of course, National Treasure got to control through pretty moderate fractions in the Preakness last time, but there are a few other horses in here that might keep him company on the front end.
Yeah, for sure. Forte has shown some speed. We have him pretty close up. The 1-horse TapitUS. He is probably the lesser of the 3 Brad Cox entrants and drawing the inside. It seems like it would be a pretty good bet that he's going to be sent from the rail and try to add some pace as well. And one thing to keep in mind when we say it's going to be a fast pace, if you're just looking at raw fractions for a 1.5-mile race, which we don't see very often, you might think the pace is kind of slow, but that fast pace is for this particular distance. So if you see a 48, that's not necessarily slow when they're going this far.
Yeah, pace is always relative, and we have seen some quicker paces in the Belmont Stakes, especially in situations where there's some intention from the connections of horses to go forward, and that could certainly be the case with the number 1 TapitUS from the rail, one of 3 Brad Cox trainees in here, or the number 5 Il Miracolo, who did win a race in gate-to-wire fashion last time, so we'll see if his connections decide to get aggressive in this race. So could potentially be a pace that gets a little quicker than some people are anticipating. Craig, let's start to go through some of these contenders, and we're going to take them in morning line order, beginning with the horse that I did peg as the morning line favorite, the number 6 Forte. And let's go all the way back to his final prep for the Kentucky Derby, or what was supposed to be his final prep for the Kentucky Derby in the Florida Derby back in early April. And it feels like we've talked about this race multiple times at this point, because there was so much discussion around this horse heading into the Kentucky Derby, and he got the job done here. Of course, did beat the eventual Kentucky Derby winner Mage, though, Craig, I know both you and I felt that Mage might have run the better race on this day. Forte, he always shows up, but this is a tall order trying to go 1.5 miles off a 10-week layoff.
It is, and he's a horse. I thought he would run well in the Derby. I just wasn't sure he's been moving forward as a 3-year-old. You can see his speed figures are very similar to what we saw from him as a 2-year-old. He's going to need to take a step forward to win a race like the Belmont Stakes.
Yeah, and we'll see if he's able to get the distance, being a son of violence. Don't want to make too much of pedigree, but people were already concerned about him going 1.25 miles in the Derby. Now he's got to get the extra 3 furlongs, stretching out from that 9 furlong Florida Derby. Let's take a look at the race 2 back, the last victory of the other Todd Pledger trainee in this Belmont Stakes. That's the number 2 Tapit Trice, and this was him winning the Bluegrass in his final prep for the Kentucky Derby. And Craig, this was Tapit Trice, I think, at his best, when Louis Saez was able to get him into the race a little bit sooner than in his surrounding starts, making an early move on the clubhouse turn to get him into contending position on the backstretch. And from there, he was just able to grind down the runner-up in this race, verifying to win. In retrospect, I'm not sure how strong this bluegrass was overall. I know we didn't give it the fastest speed figure, and Tapit Trice was just pretty disappointing at the Kentucky Derby, though maybe that wasn't a race that really suits his style.
No, it's a race where he didn't run particularly fast. He didn't really do much. The bluegrass came back kind of slow. I was anticipating him taking a step forward with the additional distance of the Kentucky Derby. I think if you're going to bet Tapit Trice and accept the price, you're putting a lot of faith in Todd Pletcher and his ability to get horses to go the 1.5 mile Belmont distance, because when you look at his PPs, he's maybe the fifth fastest horse in the race.
Yeah, this horse really does fit the profile of some past Belmont Stakes winners for Todd Pletcher, and past Belmont Stakes winners sired by Tapit, who has been so prolific in the Belmont Stakes. But he is a horse that can be a little goofy at times, has to get ridden into his races, so we'll see if he's able to work out the right trip from the inside post that he drew. Towards the outside is the number 8, Angel of Empire, and let's go back to his last victory when he won the Arkansas Derby in his final prep for the Kentucky Derby. And Craig, this horse actually was able to build on this effort when he ran in the Run for the Roses. Didn't get the job done that day as the favorite after the scratch of Forte, but I still thought he ran well. Probably a comparable race to the winner Mage. He just followed that one into the race and couldn't quite get to him at the end. But Angel of Empire was really finishing strongly in the Derby like he always does, and just feels like a horse that's pretty reliable to show up with a good effort.
Yeah, it does. It seems like 1.5 miles would be within his scope. He continued in the Derby, his progression speed figure-wise, increasing his number yet again. I don't think he would have to do that to win the Belmont. And I guess the question is 1.5 miles like it is with the rest of them, because he shows up and runs his race every time.
He does add blinkers for this race, but as has been widely reported, he's trained in blinkers for months, and Brad Cox actually has decent numbers adding blinkers in dirt routes, so it's not something I would be too concerned about. Let's check out the Preakness winner, the number 4 National Treasure, and we'll take a look at him winning the second jewel of the Triple Crown just 3 weeks ago. And Craig, as we kind of said at the top, this was not a vintage edition of the Preakness. Obviously, it did have the Kentucky Derby winner Mage in there, but that horse compromised by the moderate pace, and this just was a total merry-go-round race where the two horses that had forward position heading into the far turn just basically stayed in those positions through the final half mile of the race, and National Treasure was able to gut out the victory. Probably going to be a different scenario in this Belmont Stakes.
Yeah, he was able to run clear on the lead, as we see. The fractions were just average, nothing special, no color highlighting. He's going to have to run better. If you're betting National Treasure, you're going to have to assume that he's going to be alone on the front again. And I'm not sure that's going to happen, as we saw on the pace projector.
Let's move on to some of the bigger prices in this Belmont Stakes. The number 3 is Arcangelo, who's one of the new faces on the Triple Crown scene. We'll take a look at him winning the local prep for the Belmont Stakes, the Grade 3 Peter Pan, going the 1 turn at 9 furlong distance 4 weeks ago at Belmont. And Craig, this is a horse who had really announced his presence at Gulfstream 2 back when he ran a very fast speed figure against Maiden Company. And here he proved that performance was no fluke. Arguably got a little lucky at the very end of this race when it looked like Bishop's Bay lost a little bit of focus, but Arcangelo still ran a big race as the two of them pulled well clear of the rest of the field, and this horse does have a pedigree to suggest that Belmont distance could be within his scope.
Yeah, I thought he ran very well in the Peter Pan, even better than what the TimeformUS speed figure would indicate. The pace was slow. He was able to overcome it. And more importantly to me, he was ridden like the rider just expected him to win the race. As you say, maybe he got a little bit lucky at the end because the rider was a bit overconfident, but I really liked what I saw from Arcangelo. And to my eye, it doesn't seem like the distance will be any problem for him at all.
He's definitely one of the intriguing contenders in this race, as is another great horse that's drawn towards the outside, the number 7 Hit Show. Let's take a look at his past performances in TimeformUS. And Craig, I thought this horse ran a deceptively strong race in the Kentucky Derby because he was placed much closer to that fast pace that came apart in the early stages than a lot of the others that we're seeing come back in this race. And he made an early move into contention on the far turn, and it's not like he completely fell apart in the stretch as the race was falling apart. He actually stayed on pretty well to finish 5th that day. He still has to get a little faster, likely, to win this race, but he's going out for a nice barn in Brad Cox, and he's got that running style where he's not going to be too compromised if the pace doesn't heat up.
Yeah, he kind of has that mid-pack style. I don't think he would mind some pace in the race. And as we talked about earlier, I think he may get it from his stablemate drawn to the inside here. My one issue with him is I'm just not quite sure he's as good as his other stablemate, Angel of Empire. But if you like him and you do decide to bet on him, you're going to get a much bigger price.
Take a look at a couple of horses coming out of a race from Arkansas. That's the Bathhouse Row Stakes run towards the end of April. And we'll check out Red Route 1 making his typical late run from far back to just get up and pass Tapit Shoes, who is also in this race at the wire. Tapit Shoes was pressing the pace most of the way. There's Red Route 1 in the white cap coming into the screen towards the end, and he's going to run that rival down going the 9 furlong distance. Craig, out of this race, Red Route 1 did contest the Preakness last time, and arguably, he was the one that was most compromised by the race flow that day, as he's just not a horse that is going to be suited by a merry-go-round sort of race, trying to make that late run. It didn't work out, and he just didn't possess the finishing speed to go with the top 2 at the end of that race, but he was trying hard, staying on like he always does, and this is a horse that does have pedigree to go longer. He's actually a full brother to a horse named Red Run, who's going to be contesting the Brooklyn Stakes earlier at Belmont Park, and that horse took a big step forward when he stretched out to 1.5 miles. So Red Route 1, there are some arguments that he might get better with added distance in this race.
Yeah, and he's going to need to. We can see his speed figures. Every horse we've shown so far, I think, has better speed figures than him. So if you like Red Route 1, you're going to have to think it's 1.5 miles is going to help him run better. But there's certainly an argument to be made that that will be the case, given his pedigree and just the way he runs.
The number 1 Tapit Shoes, the other horse coming out of that Bathhouse Row, and this will be his first race since then. He is one of 3 Brad Cox tradies in this race. The other 2 Brad Cox runners have more mid-pack and closing running style. So just given the fact that this one is drawn the rail, Craig, and that he's been showing improved speed in his recent starts, I'm not going to be surprised if Jose Ortiz is under instructions to get a little aggressive from the inside and try to create some pace. Not that he's in here to be a rabbit, because he's a horse that does have some credentials in his own right, being a son of Tapit and on the upswing, but just given the different running styles of the 3 Brad Cox trainees, feels like he's going to be forwardly placed.
Yeah, and even though he hasn't led any of the races we're looking at in his PPs, you see those red fractions. He was just a length or so off of them. So he definitely has some natural speed. And given that inside post, it just seems obvious, even if he wasn't part of a 3-horse entry, that he's going to be pushed. Now, maybe he'll cede the lead if it gets a little too hot, but I think he is going to ensure a fast pace. Whether he's good enough to win a race like the Belmont Stakes, that's a different story for me.
And then the number 5, Il Miracolo. He is a horse who is coming off a victory against much weaker company last time out when he beat optional claiming foes, but he did so in a 1-turn mile race at Gulfstream, setting the pace the entire way. And Craig, I think if we were just making a pace rating for this horse based on the last race, he'd probably be shown on the lead. Hadn't really shown much of that speed in his starts just preceding that, but given the success he had last time, I'm not going to be surprised when the plan with him is to be aggressive out of the gate.
Yeah, we can see in his PPs, his 2 wins have both come wire to wire. All his other starts, he's basically been nowhere early, and he only has a couple distant second place finishes to show for it. So if they're in here to win the race, it seems like he needs to really go forward and just try to get to the front. Whether he can do it or not is another story.
Well, let's throw up our top picks for this Belmont Stakes. And Craig, you're going for that new face, the number 3, Arcangelo, who has not competed in the prior 2 legs of the Triple Crown, but has definitely been on the upswing for trainer Jenna Antonucci and has the pedigree to get this distance.
Yeah, I just really liked what I saw. I think he's better than the speed figure showed last time. It was a little overconfidently ridden. That's a negative and a positive, and that maybe they cut it a little close, but I do think he's got more in the tank, and I'll love the 1.5 miles.
And I'm going to take a shot with the number 9, Red Route 1, who's going to be a big price in this race. I know that he's a little deficient on the speed figure scale, but the Belmont Stakes distance can often be an equalizer with these horses. And some of the ones that earned big speed figures in the Kentucky Derby, still waiting for a little bit of validation of that high Derby speed figure. And once you start to maybe downgrade that race a little bit and pick apart the others' PPs, you might not have to improve as much as it seems on paper. And just given the pedigree, the way this horse finishes, and the way he was able to stay a little closer to the pace in the Preakness last time, I have some confidence that he's going to really appreciate the way that this Belmont Stakes is run, and I know I'm going to get a price on him as a horse that's been pretty overlooked. So that's a look at the Belmont Stakes on a Saturday at Belmont Park. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.